I wasn't searching for a mystery the day I found the Kemper family. I had stopped beside a small, neatly kept local cemetery not far from my home. Kind of private family plot you only notice if you're paying attention. And it was enclosed by an old iron fence. The grass was trimmed and the stones were standing intact and upright. And as I stepped closer, the owner of the property came out and asked if he could help me. And I explained that I'm a hobbyist historian and genealogist, and I just wanted to see who was buried there. And there were only 9 tombstones belonging to the members of the same family. So I got curious about their story, and I started looking into the names etched into the stones. And what I uncovered was more than a list of births and deaths. It was a story of a respected local family torn apart by jealousy, resentment, and ultimately murder. A story hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. In the quiet farming community of Walter Hill, Tennessee, in Rutherford County, the Kemper family lived the quiet kind of life that defined rural Rutherford County in the early 1900s. Families were large and the land shaped everything. There was a lot of farmers in the area. Augusta, known as Gus Kemper, was born in 1850, and he was the head of the household, with his wife, Roberta Short Kemper, who was known as Bertie. So Gus and Bertie raised 7 children together: Samuel, Mary, Nancy, William, Lucy, Althea, and Robert. But in 1910, Bertie died, leaving Gus a widow with children still at home. Some of them were grown age and some of them were still children. But for the next 13 years, he carried the weight of raising the younger ones alone and getting the older children and grandchildren to help the farm. And so that kept their family together in Walter Hill. And by 1923, Gus was an aging man who had already endured a deep loss before tragedy struck again. Sam Kemper, the eldest son, grew up working in the fields beside his father and brothers, and he was born in 1874 in a county that would eventually grow to more than 37,000 people by the 1920 census. But in Sam's day, it still felt small. Clusters of farms, a few stores, a schoolhouse, and a church was in the community. And Walter Hill was just one of those places where everyone knew your name, your people, your business. Walter Hill is still, to this day in 2026, a pretty small community compared to some of the other communities around us. It's one of those smaller little niches of Rutherford County. Still has one school, the Walter Hill School. So in 1910, Bertie died, and the Kempers were not just residents of Walter Hill. They were contributors to the growth. Land belonging to the family had been deeded for educational use by S.P. Kemper, the same Samuel Preston Kemper I'm going to tell you about today. The same Sam that would kill his brother in this story. But before that tragedy, Sam had been a respected member of the community, trusted enough to donate land for the local school, and his own children attended classes there on the very ground that he had provided. On December 17th, 1925, Rutherford County Board of Education sold 1¼ acres that had originally been deeded by Sam, and his legacy in Walter Hill's was once one of contribution and community before it was overshadowed by the violence. The Kemper children were woven into the school community long before the tragedy, too. A photograph taken on September 6, 1912 at Silver Hill School shows 3 of Sam's own children, Ollie Mae Kemper, Fanny Bella Kemper, and Preston Kemper, standing among their classmates. They would appear with the sons and daughters of neighboring families, the Rathers, the Estises, Halls. The Hall family, by the way, were the reason that Hall's Hill Pike got its name. The Vaughns, the Harrells, and the Drennans. And their teacher was Carrie Yearwood, and she's standing to the side in this photograph here on the left. And watching over these children, she probably had no idea how their family stories would unfold. Then as the innocence in that photograph stands in stark contrast to the darkness that would come, it shows that Sam's children weren't in tragedy yet. They were real living pieces of the community. Children that walked the same dirt roads, played in the same fields, and sat in the same wooden desk as their neighbors. By the early 1920s, Tennessee was deep in Prohibition. The state had outlawed liquor long before the rest of the country. And by 1923, the laws were some of the strictest in the South. Even possessing a small amount of alcohol could bring fines or jail time. And in rural counties like Rutherford, moonshining was common. And so were the tensions that came with it, arguments over money, secrecy, and the moral lines families drew differently. It was a time when tempers ran hot, and the pressure of the era seeped into homes already carrying their own burdens. For the Kemper family, those pressure came to a breaking point the morning of August 2nd, 1923. Inside of Gus's farmhouse, breakfast was being served. Will Kemper, born in 1882, was Sam's younger brother. He was sitting at the table, and what happened next was so sudden and so violent that the newspapers didn't even try to explain it. They simply reported that Will was shot and killed by his brother during breakfast. That brother was Sam. Will didn't die at the table. After the shotgun fired, he pushed his way back from the seat, ran to the door, stumbled out of the house in a desperate attempt to escape, and he only made it a short distance before he fell in the yard and collapsed. And that's where his life ended, on the ground right outside of his family home in the morning light of a Tennessee summer day. Sam fled into the cedars of Lebanon glades, rugged limestone thickets that stretch across Rutherford County and connect it to Wilson County. Officers and neighbors searched for him, lanterns cutting through the brush. And when Sam was finally captured a couple days later, the community braced for a trial that never came. Instead, Sam was declared mentally unfit to stand trial. In the eyes of the court, he was not a criminal to be punished, but a man whose mind had broken. He was committed to Central State Hospital in Nashville, an asylum that housed the mentally ill, the violent, and they were forgotten. For many families, commitment meant disappearance. A person could vanish behind institutional walls and their story was swallowed by silence. But Sam's story didn't end there. A fire broke out in Central State about 5 years after he was hospitalized there. It tore through the administration building and threw the institution into chaos. And in the confusion, several inmates were able to escape. And among the names printed in the newspapers at large was Sam Kemper, a man who had killed his brother at the breakfast. And he was suddenly free again. What happened to Sam in the hours and days after the fire is kind of lost. But we do know that he lived for decades afterwards. Records show that he died in 1958, an old man, long removed from the violence of 1923. He lived outside the asylum walls through the shadow that morning that had never left his family. And do you know what happened to Gus? The father that had raised these sons, he only lived for, Will was shot in August, and Gus, the father of this boy, died in December. And his death certificate lists his heart disease and influenza as the cause of death, but grief can wear a man down faster than the illness ever could. He buried one son and lost another to the asylum, and that is after the death of his wife. It was just a really tough time for him. So even though influenza caused the heart disease that caused ultimately his death, I'm sure that grief played a role in that. So the land, back to the school land that Sam had donated, around 1930, his daughter, Ollie Mae Kemper, who later married a Higgins and then a Jones, the same little girl in that 1912 Silver Hill School photograph, returned to that school property with her husband, and they purchased the old Walter Hill schoolhouse that stood on the land originally dated by her father. And by 1932, they were using the building to make furniture, turning a piece of learning into a place of craftsmanship. Later, they rented it out as a home, giving the structure another life, and by 1956 or 57, they sold it. The final owner was Miss Lance. She tore the schoolhouse down and used its lumber to build a new house on the same site. And those boards that once held the voices of Walter Hill's children became the bones of a modern home, carrying the past forward in a quiet but physical way. Today, in Ward Cemetery in Walter Hill, only 9 Kemper family members rest. Among them are Gus, his children, and William, the son whose life ended in the yard outside of his home. Their stones sit quietly in the Tennessee soil, holding a story that once shook a community. The story of the Kemper family is not just about murder. It's about the weight of family ties, the pressure of Prohibition era in Tennessee, and the fragile line between anger and tragedy, the way a single moment can echo for generations. It's about a father who lost everything, a brother who never came home the same, and a family marked forever by a single moment in August. A story of blood, sorrow, and the echoes that linger long after the gunshots fade. If you like this story and want me to do more, please click the like and subscribe with clicking on the bell. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day.